Hello again, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Tom Nelson, and this is a continuation of the video lesson course on diabetes control, 6 steps to gaining complete control over diabetes. This is video lesson number 4, part number 2. This is on GI basics. It's leading up to the first step, which we'll be getting to within a couple of videos. So, the gastrointestinal tract is also known as the forgotten organ. So let's get into some gastrointestinal basics. We would never think, not even a moment, of not caring for or properly feeding our dog or our cat, because we know that their life depends on it. But yet, the beneficial bacteria in our gut are equally dependent upon us for their survival. And you'll realize that your survival is equally dependent on them. So it is a concept of mutual dependence that we have, and you're going to, as soon as you learn to do your part in supporting and promoting the health of that forgotten organ, those beneficial bacteria, your health is going to change. It's going to improve dramatically, and diabetes control will significantly improve. But this is true of anyone, diabetic or not. So the scientific world is now frantically searching for a better understanding of this currently still somewhat mysterious world. They now have identified 4 primary families of bacteria. Instead of families, scientists call them phylums. So of those 4 families, or phylums, 2 are dominant. They comprise about 90% of the entire population of bacteria that's in your intestines. So when the Bacteria-DTs family dominates, there's 2 of them that dominate again. One is the Bacteria-DTs family, and the other is the Firmicutes family. So when it's the Bacteria-DTs family dominating, a person is going to be healthy. When the Firmicutes family dominates, they're not. And that includes diabetics. Anyone that's actually overweight or diabetic has a Firmicutes dominant family in their intestines. So when Bacteria-DTs family dominates, the cognitive function of the individual is going to be at its peak. The person is going to approach and maintain their ideal weight, and they're going to have an elevated metabolism, high energy, and they will rarely ever get sick. The Bacteria-DTs family only converts about 10% of everything you eat or they eat into calories and or fat. But the Firmicutes family is going to convert about 80% of everything that a person eats into calories and or fats. So when the Firmicutes family dominates, the person's cognitive function is going to falter. Their weight will be difficult to manage. They're typically overweight and many of them obese. Their metabolism will slow down and they will become a victim of every virus, cold, flu, or whatever that passes through the neighborhood. The Bacteria-DTs and the Firmicutes families are very large families with many subspecies. In fact, there's 100,000 different species in there. And like any family, some of the members of the family are not going to be good people, while others are going to be exemplary. So, about 90% of the pathogens that we suffer as adults and humans come from the Firmicutes family. That's where they're found. But even though the Bacteria-DTs family has only a few pathogens, some of them can be very, very serious. They typically do not cause issues unless you suffer a trauma or a surgery. Let's take a look at how diet impacts your bacterial balance, and especially at its earliest stages. You're going to learn how it will lead to the process of developing what's known as leaky gut. So there are special cells that make up the lining of your intestines. They're called epithelial cells, and scattered among those epithelial cells are other cells that are also very important called goblet cells. First, let's look at the primary build as you see it. Your mouth connects to your esophagus connects to your stomach in turn connects to your small intestine. The small intestine is about 21 feet long. It's all bundled together into that tight package right there in the center. And then the small intestine dumps into the colon, which is approximately 4 feet long. The overwhelming majority of all of your beneficial bacteria live in that last 4 feet of those intestines. As I said, there's 100,000 different species of those two families of bacteria that occupy your intestines. And each and every one of them has specific foods that they like to eat or need to eat. They have specific pH, which is the acidity in the gut, and they have specific temperatures where they can live. And all of these bacteria have a very narrow range in each of those that they can actually survive in. So if something happens to change that environment where it goes out of that very tight range, they will probably die. So as you move through your intestines from the stomach all the way to the rectum, there's a massive number of different environments, temperature, pH, and so forth, as it goes from inch to inch all the way through the intestines. And each of those 100,000 different species have found their niche in there. They have found the place in the intestines where all the conditions are perfect for them. And you're going to learn how there's a number of things that can cause that to get out of balance. So, depending on what you eat, as it passes through the intestines, there are certain bacteria that are going to be fed, and there are some that won't, because each of those bacteria are very similar to our own cells. They have factories within them that can produce amino acids, hormones, and enzymes, just like all of our cells can. And so those bacteria will produce enzymes to break down foods that are of the type that they would normally eat. But if you're not eating the type of diet that those particular bacteria require, then those enzymes aren't going to do them any good. They're not going to break the food down. There's going to be no nutritional value there for that specific species of those bacteria. And if you eat a diet that's high in chemistry, chemicals, food additives, and seriously overcooked foods, or junk food, or fast food, you're going to be feeding the wrong bacteria in that gut. And so those will flourish, and the ones that you would prefer to be healthy and survive will not. They will falter. And you're going to see how that's going to lead to some very serious issues. So the inside of your small intestine looks like the upper right-hand corner of this illustration. And you'll see that the walls of the intestine are wavy, and that continues through the entire 21 feet of your small intestine. And each of those little waves are covered with what are called villi. They're like fingers. They stick upward towards the inside of the intestines, and they're covered with these epithelial cells and the goblet cells that I mentioned. And those are what pick up all the food and the nutrients and so forth that have been digested and prepared by the beneficial bacteria. And then it gets into, you see over in here is the venule blood vessel. That's the vessel that picks up all of the digested food matter and carries it through to the hepatic blood vessel system that carries all of the digested food to the liver. In there you also see the arterial blood vessel. That's the vessel that feeds the cells that make up those villi fingers and keeps them alive and functioning. And then over on the left, you see the lymph vessel, which is the one that picks up the triglycerides that are manufactured in your intestines from the fats from the meat. And then those triglycerides are going to be pumped up to your neck and dumped into your bloodstream. We've talked about that a number of times in the various videos. So this is a closer look at one of those villi fingers. And you'll see how there's a single layer of cells that actually make up the membrane that completely covers the interior of your intestines. It creates a very tight lining if those cells are healthy. And those are called the epithelial cells. And those epithelial cells have a very special diet. They are totally dependent upon some of those very special bacteria in order to stay alive. Some of the beneficial bacteria in your gut are what's called lactic acid producing beneficial bacteria. They will break down vegetables and fiber and a few other things, but they are focused primarily on those kind of things. Foods that are more difficult to digest and end up in the colon pretty much undigested. And then these lactic acid producing bacteria will release the enzymes, which will basically ferment the food and the fiber and break it down, and they will produce something called butyric acid. And that butyric acid is one of those lactic acids, and that is the primary food of those epithelial cells. So if you don't eat enough fiber and you don't eat enough vegetables, which the overwhelming majority of people do not, then you're not feeding those cells very well. You're not feeding your pet, someone that really seriously depends on you. And consequently, bad things are going to happen. So sprinkled in, as I said, among those epithelial cells are these goblet cells. And these goblet cells will be healthy if those epithelial cells are healthy. And the goblet cells produce only one thing. They have massive number of warehouses up inside. They have a nucleus, they have factories, just like all of the other cells of our body. And those factories are going to produce primarily mucus. And that mucus then, when the cells are healthy and everybody's happy, that mucus layer will lightly coat the entire inside of your intestines. And that mucus layer is extremely important. That mucus layer gives, first of all, the beneficial bacteria that partner with the epithelial cells to produce those butyric acid and other things. And that gives those beneficial bacteria a place to set up and build colonies and expand and flourish. And it's also a place where your immune white cells take up residence. And they lay in wait for attackers that are going to try to either damage that mucus layer or the epithelial cells, and then they can go to work. They also are home to something called phages, which are beneficial viruses, which you'll learn about in a future video. They're of equal importance. All of those things are totally dependent on that mucus layer. And the only way that mucus layer is going to be there and be healthy is if those epithelial cells are healthy. So if they're not healthy, then that mucus layer is going to start breaking down. You're going to lose a lot of your immune function in your intestines because there's nowhere for those white blood cells to live. And there's not going to be a place for the beneficial bacteria to live, or the phages as well. So we'll be getting into that in greater detail. So the epithelial cells and the beneficial bacteria are going to produce digestive enzymes that are going to disassemble. They're going to break down the complex carbohydrates and the protein into basic elements. And then they will feed lactic acid producing bacteria, which are going to produce the butyrate. So the lactic acid producing bacteria are primarily the lactobacillus and the bifidobacteria. Those are the two primary beneficial bacteria you find in probiotics. So they produce the enzymes that ferment the fiber and the carbohydrates, those vegetables, and the lactic acids. There's actually three of them. Butyrate is the most important. Propionate and acetate are also important, but not as. We'll focus on butyrate. So the microvilli, which are very, very tiny hair-like fingers that are actually on the surface of those endothelial cells, they are the ones that actually collect the nutrients and transport them via the vessel to the liver. That's the hepatic vessels. Healthy epithelial cells, once again, will maintain a tight bond one with the other, and a thin mucus layer is going to cover all of that, including those little villi. They will protect them. And a healthy mucus layer, again, provides living quarters for that beneficial bacteria that those epithelial cells depend on, and the immune cells, and again, the phages. Together, they're going to protect the epithelial cells from any kind of attack from pathogens, bacteria, viruses, or whatever. So now proceed to lesson number 4, part 3, and that's going to get into what is leaky gut. This is very important. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please pay it forward and share what you learn with others. Thank you.